Nice.
All right, do you guys see the presentation?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Bet. Okay, so
All right, so I guess start with the introduction. How you guys want to present the slides that we all made? Cool with that?
yeah,
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
All right, so we'll do the introduction. I guess I'll introduce myself last because I'll start off and then pass on from there. I think the only exception we might have to make for the actual presentation is I did flip-flop 2 of the slides around. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
Which ones? Which ones you flip flop?
The issues continued slide, I made that one first because it kind of explains what the issues were, and then the second half of it does a better job explaining like what came of the issues and where we're at now.
okay.
So it's the same exact slide, I just put them in a different order. So I'll come in, introduce ourselves, introduce the topic, and then roll right into the background.
Okay. Why is it not changing? There we go.
And so everybody kind of already understands the whole 9-dash line and the history behind it, so I'm not going to like bore anybody. But just to explain, I guess, this like why this is such an issue, explain what the islands are, because we talked about the Spratly Islands, but there's a lot of other ones involved. The economics behind it, there's been a lot of oil and gas reserves found. They've been building up like militarization, resources for that, and explain why these islands are so important, because if they all have their own EEZ, that means they all overlap. They're going to be pretty much on everybody's toes. And that's why it's such a big deal today. And then we'll go into the next slide, which should be the first of the issues. Okay, yeah. So this one explains what the islands are and how UNCLOS defines them, because that's pretty much what the standard is for the courts. So what they found is that these man-made islands don't have the same rights as regular islands. They're not even islands altogether. That's on a later slide. They're considered LTZs or LTEs. Basically, none of these are real islands anyway. In the eyes of the law, they're only really acknowledged by China. And they continue to expand and build on it, even though they know that, I guess, these areas don't have the same legal rights. But that's the big point of this slide.
All right, I can tackle this one. All right, so some issues with China's claim to some of these islands is that on top of not only like destroying coral reefs, they started to militarize the islands. We use a lot of satellite imagery to just tell that they're building huge landing strips, anti-air defense, and I think it's radar detection for long-range missiles. So on top of that, like they're militarizing their islands, but a big majority is the whole economic part of it. So that whole area, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, China, like a lot of them get their food from that kind of area. So China, well, South China Sea has 20% of the global fish catch. Not to mention, like it's probably like 100% of like everybody's markets around. So when China like dumped all this sand, they destroyed all these coral reefs, kind of displacing all of that. And so that kind of turned into more or less like an island race among China, Taiwan, and Vietnam to try and keep building more islands just to get claims out in the South China Sea to even be able to support their food for their countries. And on top of that, like China as well, like they'll cut off separate islands like we talked about, and they'll just, there's an example coming up later, but like say Vietnam will have an island, China will blockade it, essentially make it uninhabitable. Vietnam would leave, and then China will just take it over. So like they're just taking over islands without even building them. Next slide.
Yeah, so they've been doing all that stuff, and a lot of people think things haven't happened, but the problem is China disregards this. So when they went to court against the Philippines, the courts pretty much sided with the Philippines on all the issues they covered. I guess the big one was that the court kind of set the example that these are not islands, so they don't have the same rights as far as 200-mile EEZ. I think out of all of them, the most that China would be able to get would be the 12 nautical miles for some of the higher islands that are above sea level at high tide. Another big one that Hamilton kind of already mentioned, but China had been blocking off islands within the Philippines EEZ, and that was a huge deal because that's where they get a lot of their fishing from. I believe it's the Fire Islands, or gotta remember the exact name. But they found that they were illegally occupying it and that the Philippines had the rights to fish there. And we kind of talk about it later on with the grounding of the ship, but that was one way that the Philippines was able to like really stick it to China because they haven't been following any of this. Some of the other UNCLOS violations that like Hamilton already mentioned, a lot of the dumping, illegal fishing, they also got found guilty of all that. But again, that's kind of the whole problem is that China doesn't acknowledge this court's ruling. Like they acknowledge it in the sense that they still want to continue their fight and they still want to, you know, push their claim. But as far as the world is concerned, the courts are concerned, they have nothing left.
Yeah. Also, something to really to add on my GCS class that I'm taking right now. We're talking about the world courts and everything, and the reason why, like, well, everybody knows why China, it's not going with the rulings of the court. But one of the reasons why they're also not doing is because other countries who don't like or don't agree with what the court's rulings are, they tend to just neglect it as well. Like the U.S., there's been a few encounters with that and a few encounters with other countries too. So, it's something that because, we've been doing it and other countries have been doing it, of course, then China will be like, okay, well, I'm going to also as well reject the rulings and then do what I'm going to do. So, I don't know, it's just something for us to look at as well, just how NATO, or not NATO, but how the United Nations are and the courts are, like how much little power that they have since, any country can just.
Yeah, and I think something that we should add on this slide, or at least mention, I want to say that this was, because China like wasn't agreeing to the decision in the first place, I think the original court ruling said that, because this is mostly between the Philippines and China, the original court ruling said that the Philippines and China had to rule it out. Like they agreed to the Philippines, but they weren't gonna go ahead and like give China punishment or tell them how to like, I guess, resolve the tensions.
Mm-hmm.
I think this court came in after, or this was to split it up, basically, because China wasn't acknowledging it. The Philippines wasn't able to come up with a solution, so they put this out instead. I could be wrong, but I think pretty sure that's how it went. It was arbitration, I believe, is the word they used. But anyway.
Yep. Cool. Next slide.
Oh yeah, I got this one. So as of November 26th, which is today, the time we're filming it, an article came out about this old vessel that kind of ran aground back in 1999. Belonged to the Philippines, called the Sierra Madre. And what the Philippines has done in light of 1999, China started to retake the Mischief Islands, Mischief Reef. So that's one of the locations where they put their pump and dump type of islands. So it's kind of in retaliation, like I talked about earlier with the whole island race. The Philippines kind of threw this vessel, an old World War II vessel, threw it on the reef, put a couple of Navy sailors from the Philippines on it and just called it their own territory. But in light of recent news, China demanded from the Philippines that they remove this vessel, which would probably be very hard to do in the first place because it's probably like run down as all hell.
Mm-hmm.
But they told them to remove it. And like we also talked about earlier, how China's kind of deterring and blockading little small islands. They're doing the same thing here with their Coast Guard. So what they did when resupply vessels tried to come, they used their water hoses to deter them, the Philippine resupply vessels, and just more or less try to take over this kind of, this, I wouldn't call it an island, but little shoal that Philippine is trying to claim. But this is just like literally a current example. It's going to be like 4 days, like on Monday, when we talk about this. Like it's still going on right now. It's pretty current. And there's tons of claims to like every little island in the South China Sea. Good. All right, same one. Okay, so what has the U.S. done to more or less combat this? Essentially, we are just conducting freedom of navigation operations, which is FONOPS. And since May of 2017, we have like 6 documented on record. Not to mention, earlier this year in September, we made our second sort of statement in the South China Sea by using the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group to go within 12 miles of I forget which island it was. I don't even think it said it on there. but a specific island, they went within the 12 nautical miles, kind of deterring the whole territorial claim. And essentially what the U.S. is doing is just making a statement saying, hey, we don't support this at all. But in order to prevent more or less like a kinetic issue with it, the U.S. is just not taking claims to anything China's saying. So, yeah.
So with predictions, we put on, 2 different predictions. Of course, one that will probably happen and one that probably won't happen. But something that will probably happen is that, of course, China will continue with their claims of the South China Sea. They continue to conduct, their military operations, enforcing those claims, like those blockades that they're doing with the Philippines. As a result, of course, tensions will continue to rise and the conflict will not end between the neighboring countries within the South China Sea. Our other prediction probably won't happen, but an unforeseen event or accident will happen and will start a major war in the South China Sea. Again, this probably will not happen, but like just a few examples of how World War I started off. I think, I forgot, they started off because of a...
Sinking of the Lusitania.
Say that again?
The sinking of the Lusitania. It was pretty sure it was a passenger vessel, and
Right.
don't quote me on who sank it. I want to say it was Germany, but that was what got the U.S. into World War I.
I don't think they even like confirmed any of those. They just claimed their adversaries blew it up. Like Gulf of Tonkin, they claimed Vietnam blew up the...
Yeah, and there was already, when I looked at like past history, like the Spratly Islands, like Vietnam has already sent like a ship there in the 1970s, and China sank it and killed everybody. And then I think again in like the 1980s or 1990s, there was another like armed conflict where like 80 Vietnamese were killed.
Yeah.
Could be wrong.
Yeah, I'll research more into like specifically how World War I started, because my point, the point I want to just bring out is that like something like that might happen, a sinking or an accident or any such thing that would start or spark a war, and because of that, major countries will get involved, and if that happens, then of course we're gonna probably see our people down over there. So that's our predictions, and here are references. We'll ask for any questions, have a brief discussion with questions, and that's the end of our presentation. Cool.
I think that came in at like 11.
Yeah, so how long did that take? That was like 11 minutes?
I think we started at 36.
Yeah. So it's not bad at all.
I mean, I think once we iron out some of the facts and details of everything, we should be coming in right on time.
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy. And I did just check the Lusitania fact. That was true. It was a British ship that had a bunch of Americans on it. And once the Germans sank that is when the U.S., decided to end World War I.
Dope.
So yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring in. I mean, like showing that what's happened in the past could happen,
Happen again.
Especially because we just had that submarine that had like a collision in the South China Sea, like that.
Yeah.
Very well could have been the same thing.
Yeah.
It hit a Chinese sub.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. So what Sir was talking about, like I talked to him about it. So the South China Sea itself is pretty shallow. Like I don't have a security clearance, and I don't give a fuck. So I'm just gonna tell you, the South China Sea is like low, like very shallow, and submarines can only operate at a certain depth, and that's like what he was like telling me about. And then, more or less, it was a Chinese sub. So we hit a fucking Chinese sub because we can't detect each other, obviously, and we can only operate at certain depths. We're not stupid enough to hit a mountain. So.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think when I like the news articles I was reading about it, they mentioned that like China was really upset about it. But if you think about it, like, why would China be upset with an American sub hitting something unless that something was a Chinese sub? But yeah.
It also took a month for them to come out about it. So.
Yep.
Well, dang.
Because if we're exercising FONOPS like I was talking about, then why wouldn't we just say, hey, we hit a fucking underwater mountain?
Fair enough.
Yeah. Bet.
All right, guys. Well, I think this is pretty solid.